In today's journey, we are making root beer from extract. We start by pre-sanitizing all of our equipment that will be used today, including our mixing vessel that we have preheated a half gallon of water to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to help dissolve the sugars, but below a boil to avoid altering the flavor of the sugars. Be mindful that root beer extract comes in varying sizes of concentration. We are using a 4-ounce concentrate that requires us to use 24 milliliters. If you are using the Brewer's Best Classic Soda extracts, you will want to cut that in half to 12 milliliters. Although once you get a couple batches under your belt, you may wish to change this amount to suit your taste. Now is when we start adding the sugars. Today we are using a half pound of cane sugar and a half pound of honey. We recommend wildflower honey as it is affordable and brings in good flavor. Although you can feel free to mix and match any kind of sugars that you would like to put into your root beer. We recommend about a pound per gallon, although if you like it sweeter or less sweet, you can change that up. You can also use alternative sugars or substitutes too. That's why you will not find diet extracts, as it really comes down to the sugars that you add yourself as opposed to being a different flavor that you buy at the store. This is also when you would add 2 ounces of maltose dextrin if you would like to increase the body and mouth flavor, although this is optional. It looks like Phil's getting a little aggravated that not all the honey is coming out of the lab gear. But because this should be a fun pastime, we don't recommend getting so caught up in the details like Phil does. Some of the best chefs in the world never use measuring equipment, unless they're pastry chefs. With all the ingredients added, we will now want to make sure that we thoroughly mix everything up, as the sugars will dissolve much easier in this hotter liquid than the colder one when we add the other half gallon. It's at this point in the journey which you will have to make a choice as to whether you are going to bottle or keg your root beer. If you are already a brewer with a kegging system, you may be tempted to keg right away, although there are many benefits to using the plastic bottles instead. And if this is your first time making root beer or beer, we definitely recommend not using the kegs, as they come with their own voodoo magic that you must master to use them properly. Also, once a keg is used to house root beer or any other soda, you will definitely not want to use it for any beers coming up, as they will impart flavors into future batches. Another downside to trying to keg pop in the proper fashion is that you need what's called a soda regulator and about 20 feet of dispensing line to do it right. There will be a link in the description to some of the equipment. With the finish line at the horizon, we now add the other half gallon of water to the vessel. If you're going to be using the bottling method, we recommend this to be chilled, as it will help cool down the rest of the water to below 90 degrees so that the yeast has a safe temperature to rehydrate in for the next 10 minutes. We recommend using the plastic bottles so that you can squeeze them to check for carbonation over the next couple of days, and the EC 1118 champagne yeast. After filling your bottles, keep them at room temperature, about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 2 days, squeezing about every 12 hours to check for firmness. Once they're about rock hard, or to your desired carbonation, put them in the fridge to halt the process. But in classic overkill fashion, Phil will be using the keg instead. He said he wanted to try out a few things before we put together our kegging episode. And in return, he promised to quit using the stir plate for frickin' everything. Not only does it create needless noise in the studio, but now he has to use the keeper magnet to pull the stir bar out so that he doesn't pour it into the keg, causing problems down the road. Which is a real shame, because most of the mixing got done by the whisk anyways. The lesson here is don't use your fancy equipment when something simpler can do the job just as well. Even though we won't be using yeast to do our carbonation, we will still want to check our temperature so that we make sure to not overload the fridge that we place this in, just like we wouldn't want to put a large stock pot of soup into the fridge to come back to warm milk later. Although you could use yeast to do the carbonation at this point, it would be hard to know how much carbonation is actually going on in there. And the downside is also that you wouldn't know how much alcohol you've created, as if you let the yeast eat too much sugar, it will create alcohol. The benefit to doing this in the plastic bottles is that you can then squeeze them to see how carbonated they are, and then place them in the fridge to stop the fermentation process once they are rock hard, or to your desired carbonation level. Because we don't have the proper soda regulator, we are just hitting it with about 30 psi, gonna put it in our fridge at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit for a couple of days and see what happens. A more traditional psi would be 40. And with that, the last thing Phil's gonna do before placing this in the fridge is pour a little of the sanitizer over the top of the keg and double check for leaks. So long as he doesn't see new bubbles forming all over the place, he knows everything is good. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and before Phil forgets, we're going to make sure he does the cleanup right away. And don't forget, if you have any questions or concerns, you can leave them in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.